The evening began as usual, but the air was thick with tension. From the moment I crossed the threshold of her house, I could feel her icy gaze on my skin. At the table, in the center of attention as always, sat my mother-in-law. Her impeccably styled hair, strict makeup, and cold smile betrayed her habit of controlling everything. "How nice of you to join us." Her voice was soft, but each syllable scratched like nails. I knew what this was about. This dinner wasn't just a meal, it was her next attempt to assert her dominance. But this time, I felt something more, something dark and unsettling. As we sat at the table, I noticed how she lingered over the glasses. Her fingers trembled slightly as she placed them in front of each of us. My intuition whispered that something was wrong. Thoughts swirled in my mind like a storm. Could she truly be capable of something so terrifying? Doubts and fears mixed, creating a volatile cocktail that wouldn't let me rest. To family, she raised her glass with the air of someone who had just done something genius. I picked up mine, but instead of sipping, I pretended to savor the aroma. And that's when I noticed a faint shimmer at the bottom of her glass. Memories of her words from the previous week sliced through my mind like a sharp blade. She had been talking to a friend. Family should be strong, and weak links need to be removed. They could have been just words, but at the time, they sounded like a warning. Now those words returned, gaining more weight. I tried not to panic, but a chill ran down my spine. The conversations around the table grew livelier, but I hardly heard them. My mind was consumed by one thing: how to figure out what was happening. I felt like a prisoner surrounded by predators. Every glance, every word from my mother-in-law felt suspicious. Perhaps she was trying to hide something, or maybe I was just being paranoid. My hands trembled slightly, but I tried to mask it by adjusting the ring on my finger. "Why aren't you eating, dear?" Her voice, quiet but laced with mockery, reached my ears. I met her gaze, trying not to betray my thoughts. "I'm just admiring the lovely table setting," I replied, trying to keep my composure. She nodded, but the corners of her lips twitched slightly, as if she knew something I didn't. I remembered my mother's words from childhood. "Always listen to your heart. It will tell you who you can trust." But my heart was now sounding an alarm. I watched her every move, how she passed the dishes, adjusted her napkin, and occasionally glanced at me from under her lashes. It all seemed too ordinary, but it was precisely this ordinariness that felt suspicious. When the guests began joking and laughing, I realized I couldn't hear their words anymore. My focus was entirely on her hands, on how she touched her glass. What if I was wrong? What if the shimmer at the bottom of her glass was just a trick of the light? My logic tried to dismiss the thought, but intuition wouldn't let go. I recalled how once she had said, "Some things are better left unknown." At the time, I hadn't paid attention to her words, but now they echoed in my mind like a warning. The evening had just begun, but I already felt drained. Every gesture of mine was calculated, every word carefully chosen. She smiled, her face remaining cold, but there was something in her eyes that made me tense up even more. I understood one thing. This was not just a dinner. It was a game, and I didn't yet know its rules. I approached this dinner with trepidation. A week earlier, an accidentally overheard conversation between my mother-in-law and her friend had put me on edge. "She's unnecessary here," she had said with a note of irritation. If only she would just disappear. The words had been spoken in a tone that made it seem like they were discussing a broken toy or an unwanted piece of furniture. I couldn't believe my ears, but the fear that took root inside me grew stronger every day. In the evenings, I analyzed every interaction we had, every word she said, looking for signs of ill intent. The more I searched, the more I found. Her smiles, her compliments, all now seemed like part of a game. I tried convincing myself it was just my imagination, but I woke up at night drenched in cold sweat at the thought that it might be real. A few days ago, I accidentally stumbled upon her old notebook. Leafing through it, I noticed several strange entries, hastily scribbled. She suspects. Convince everyone. These phrases wouldn't leave me alone. What did they mean? Was she writing about me? Or was it just a coincidence? My inner voice whispered that there were no coincidences. I thought long and hard about what to do. Direct accusations could only make things worse, and I had no proof. Then I had an idea. If I could switch the glasses, everything would become clear. But there was one catch: how to do it without anyone noticing. I would have to play my part perfectly. On the day of the dinner, I went to a store and bought tiny star-shaped stickers. They were almost invisible, especially if placed on the bottom of a glass. In the kitchen, while she was distracted, I quickly stuck one on my glass and then discreetly switched it with hers. My heart pounded, but I managed to return to the table before anyone noticed. Now I could be sure which glass she would take. When I sat back down at the table, the world around me seemed to shrink. It felt like all eyes were on me, even though no one actually suspected anything. Only her eyes, occasionally stopping on me, made my heart race even faster. I tried to look calm, but inside, everything was boiling. Every minute of waiting felt like an eternity. "You seem tense today," she remarked casually. I smiled back, trying to hide my nerves. "Just a bit tired," I replied. Her gaze lingered on me slightly longer than usual, making me even more uneasy. As everyone settled in, I noticed her subtle glance at the glasses once again. It was a fleeting motion, but to me, it seemed deliberate. Her fingers lightly traced the edge of one glass, almost as if she were confirming something. Could she have suspected my plan? Or was this part of her own scheme? I tried to keep my thoughts hidden, but inside, I was unraveling. During dinner, she increasingly directed the conversation toward me. Her questions, her comments, it was all too staged. The guests laughed and followed her lead, but I noticed how her gaze repeatedly found mine. It was a battle of nerves, and she was clearly enjoying every moment of it. At one point, she raised her glass. I froze. Her lips trembled slightly as though she wanted to say something but thought better of it. Then she took a small sip and placed the glass back on the table. My heart raced. If my suspicions were correct, this could be the first clue to uncovering her intentions. But what if I was wrong? What if I had misjudged everything? She turned to me again. "You seem like you have something on your mind. Share with us, dear." Her voice was sweet, but there was a faint edge to it, a hidden challenge. I felt a cold sweat trickling down my spine. "I'm just enjoying the dinner," I replied with a smile that felt stiff and unnatural. She smiled back, but her eyes remained as cold as ever. At that moment, I realized there was no turning back. I had made my move, and now it was her turn. The dinner continued, but the tension in the air only grew thicker. Every glance, every word felt like a piece of a puzzle I couldn't yet solve. Was I overreacting, or was my intuition guiding me to something real? Only time would tell, but deep down, I knew. This was only the beginning. When my mother-in-law raised her glass again, it felt like time slowed to a crawl. All eyes were on her, but none with the intensity of mine. I struggled to maintain a neutral expression, hiding the storm raging inside me. She brought the glass to her lips, took a slow sip, and paused. Her eyes widened ever so slightly before she quickly composed herself. "What an exquisite flavor," she remarked, placing the glass back on the table. My hand instinctively moved toward my phone. If something were to happen, I wanted to be ready to call for help, yet something in her behavior made me pause. She looked tense, but not alarmed. Her smile grew sharper, but she continued to act as though nothing unusual was happening. The guests, unaware of the hidden tension, chatted and laughed. oblivious to the undercurrents at the table. Yet I noticed her gaze darting around the room. This was no accidental gesture. It felt calculated, as if she were waiting for something. For a sign, perhaps? My mind raced, grasping at any possible explanation. "You look pale, dear." She addressed me, her tone dripping with artificial concern. I felt my face flush, but I quickly tried to compose myself. "No, no, I'm fine," I said, raising my glass to make a symbolic sip. Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she said nothing. I set the glass back down, unwilling to take any risks. At that moment, I saw her lean toward her husband, seated next to her. Their conversation was too quiet for me to hear, but their expressions betrayed a silent understanding. My unease deepened. This was the moment when every detail could hold a crucial clue. "Tell us something interesting," one of the guests suddenly said, trying to lighten the atmosphere. All eyes turned to my mother-in-law as if her presence alone commanded the room's attention. She smiled and began recounting a story from her youth, effortlessly captivating everyone. But I could see through the facade. This was a distraction, a deliberate attempt to shift focus. Her voice was steady and confident, and the guests hung on every word. But I saw her sneaking glances in my direction, gauging my reaction. It was a game of psychological endurance, and she was clearly savoring the tension. At one point, her gaze lingered on my glass, sending a chill down my spine. Could she know that I suspected something? And if so, how would she respond? When her story concluded, the room erupted in applause. Yet I couldn't ignore one troubling detail. Her glass was empty. She had drained it completely, which didn't align with my suspicions. If she truly had sinister intentions, why would she drink so calmly? Or was this another calculated move? My thoughts were interrupted when she spoke again. "I believe our evening is just beginning. Shall we move to the living room? It's much cozier there." Her suggestion was met with enthusiastic agreement, and the guests began to rise from the table. But I stayed seated, unable to tear my eyes away from her glass. What if I was wrong? Or worse, what if I was right? She approached me, leaning in close enough that I could smell her perfume. "Aren't you coming?" she asked with a slight smile. Her voice carried such confidence that it took my breath away. "In a moment, I just need to finish here," I replied, striving to sound casual. She nodded and turned to join the others, but there was a subtle menace in her movements that only someone who knew her as well as I did could perceive. Left alone at the table, I stared at her glass. Something wasn't right. Had I missed a crucial detail? Or was she orchestrating everything to make me question my reality? I picked up her glass, but before I could examine it further, she reappeared in the doorway, as if waiting for this very moment. "Are you all right?" Her voice startled me, and I nearly dropped the glass. "Just checking if there's any wine left," I quickly replied, trying to sound nonchalant. But in her eyes, I saw triumph. She knew I was trying to unravel her plan, but she wasn't rushing to reveal her hand. I realized the game was far from over, and her true intentions remained shrouded in mystery. But one thing was certain. This evening was going to change everything. As the guests resumed their chatter and the atmosphere lightened, I knew deep down that the end game was yet to come. The guests' laughter and idle chatter seemed to fade into the background as my focus remained on her. My mother-in-law seemed at ease, mingling effortlessly, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that this was all part of her carefully crafted facade. Her every move, every glance was deliberate, as if she was orchestrating the evening's events with precision. Finally, dessert was served. A beautifully presented dish was placed in front of each guest, but I couldn't focus on its elegance. My eyes darted to her plate, and then to mine. Was there something hidden in this seemingly harmless course? My hands trembled as I picked up my fork, pretending to admire the delicacy, while trying to calm my racing heart. She noticed my hesitation. "You'll love it," she said, her voice as smooth as silk. "I made sure this one was special, just for you." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. I forced a smile and took a small bite, carefully observing her reaction. She watched me closely, her expression unreadable, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of satisfaction, or perhaps amusement. It was impossible to tell. The conversation at the table continued, but I couldn't engage. My thoughts were consumed by the intricate web of possibilities surrounding her intentions. What was her endgame? And why did she seem so confident, so untouchable? Suddenly, she raised her glass once more. "To family," she declared, her voice ringing out above the noise. The guests cheered and followed suit, raising their glasses in unison. I hesitated, glancing at her glass and then at mine. The star sticker I had placed earlier was still there, a tiny beacon of my growing paranoia. Reluctantly, I lifted my glass and joined the toast, taking the smallest possible sip. Her gaze met mine, and for a brief moment, it felt as though the rest of the room disappeared. It was just the two of us, locked in a silent battle of wills. Her smile widened. "You're learning," she said softly, so quietly that only I could hear. Her words sent a shiver down my spine. The tension broke when she suddenly leaned closer, her tone shifting from cordial to icy. "You think I didn't notice? That little trick with the glasses? You thought that would fool me?" Her voice was low enough to avoid drawing attention from the others, but it cut through me like a blade. My breath caught. She knew. Of course she knew. "I don't know what you're talking about," I replied, feigning innocence. My voice was steady, but my hands betrayed me, trembling as I set my glass down. "Oh, don't play coy," she continued, her expression both amused and threatening. "You've always seen me as the villain, haven't you? Always assuming the worst. But let me tell you something, dear. You don't know half of it." Her words were cryptic, but her delivery was chilling. Around us, the dinner continued, as if nothing was happening. Laughter and conversation filled the air, oblivious to the charged exchange taking place. "What do you want from me?" I finally asked, my voice barely a whisper. She leaned back, slightly, her gaze piercing. "I want you to understand. This dinner isn't what it seems. None of it is." Her cryptic responses only deepened my confusion. What was she trying to say? That this was all some elaborate test? Or was it a game, a way to torment me for her own amusement? "You've been trying to figure me out," she said, her voice softening slightly. "But the truth is you never will, because you're not ready to see it." My frustration boiled over. "Stop talking in riddles. If you have something to say it." Her lips curled into a sly smile. "Patience, my dear. You'll know soon enough." With that, she returned to the table's lively conversation, leaving me reeling. Every word, every subtle movement, felt like part of a carefully laid trap, but I couldn't yet see the full picture. As dessert plates were cleared, she made an announcement that caught everyone's attention. "Let's move to the parlor," she suggested. "There's something I'd like to share." The guests eagerly agreed, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. I followed reluctantly, my mind racing with possibilities. What was she planning now? In the parlor, she stood before the group, her demeanor calm, yet commanding. "Before we end the evening, I wanted to share a little something about family," she began, her eyes scanning the room before landing on me. "Family isn't always what it seems. Sometimes it takes strength to protect those we love." Her words were vague but felt pointed, aimed directly at me. My stomach churned as I tried to decipher her true meaning. She gestured toward the drinks that had been prepared for everyone. "One last toast," she said with a smile, "to resilience." The guests raised their glasses, but I hesitated. Something about her tone sent a chill down my spine. Her eyes locked with mine as she raised her glass and took a deliberate sip. "You're still afraid," she said quietly, addressing me as the others drank and chatted. "You think this is all a trap, but the real trap is your fear I didn't respond, unable to process her words. She placed her glass down and stepped closer. "You'll understand one day," she said softly, her voice almost tender. "Everything I've done, I did for you." Her words struck me like a blow. Was this some twisted version of care? Or was she toying with me, pushing me to the edge of reason? The evening ended with lingering questions and no answers. As the last guest left, we found ourselves alone. She approached me, her expression uncharacteristically gentle. "You've been through a lot tonight," she said, almost kindly. "But you should know, things aren't always as they seem." I stiffened, unsure of what to say. "You've always been so quick to judge," she continued. "But maybe it's time you start asking yourself why." Her cryptic remarks left me speechless. Finally, I asked, "What are you trying to say?" She sighed, a rare hint of vulnerability crossing her face. "That sometimes protecting someone means letting them hate you. It's not easy, but it's necessary." Her words were heavy, layered with meaning I couldn't yet grasp. As she turned to leave, she paused in the doorway. "You'll figure it out, eventually." And with that, she was gone, leaving me alone with a table full of empty glasses and unanswered questions. The evening's events played over in my mind, a labyrinth of clues and mysteries with no clear resolution. The only certainty was that this was far from over. Thank you for watching the story to the end. Your support means so much to us. Please share your thoughts about the plot in the comments. It truly helps our channel grow. And I'd like to apologize for any mistakes in the text. Your feedback is invaluable and helps improve the quality of our content. See you in the next video.